Between July 2011 and June 2013, a neurosurgeon named Christopher Duntsch operated on roughly 38 patients in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He maimed 31 of them. 2 died. These were not isolated mistakes or the misfortunes of unusually difficult cases. The errors were consistent, catastrophic, and atymotically inexplicable to the colleagues who watched him work. He severed nerves unrelated to the operations, confused basic spinal tissue layers, left instruments and drains inside bodies, and performed procedures that left people paralyzed or in permanent, life-altering pain. And then he moved to the next hospital. And the next, for 2 years, across multiple institutions. Patients trusted a system that had not verified his capacity to wield a scalpel safely. The system failed them before they ever met him. Christopher Duntsch presented as remarkable on paper. He held a doctorate in cell biology in addition to his medical degree and completed neurosurgical residency. In interviews and credentialing files, his language was precise. He could describe procedures in academic detail, but precision on paper did not translate to competence in the operating room. Nurses, scrub technicians, anesthesiologists, and surgeons who assisted him described actions that made no anatomical sense, cutting where no cut should be, probing irrelevant tissue planes, failing to recognize catastrophic complications. Robert Henderson, a neurosurgeon who observed a patient's condition decline under Duntsch's hands, later concluded in a formal complaint that his colleague was either grossly incompetent or willfully harmful. He could not be certain which. The mechanism that allowed this harm to continue was the hospital credentialing system. Credentialing depends heavily on references from prior employers and on entries in centralized databases such as the National Practitioner Databank. But reporting to those systems is neither absolute nor uniform. Hospitals often provide neutral or guarded references to avoid legal exposure. Not all terminations trigger mandatory reporting. Several institutions that curtailed Duntsch's privileges either failed to report the severity of his conduct or supplied references that obscured it. The result was a chain of new appointments and more patients with no reason to suspect danger. The human toll is immediate and brutal. Mary Efurd, 74, could not walk after a procedure meant to relieve pain. Philip Mayfield, 58, was left permanently paralyzed. Kelly Martin died following complications of surgery. Jeff Glidewell endured chronic, agonizing nerve pain after a drain was left inside his body. These 4 are representative of 33 injured or killed elective operations that became lifelong sentences of disability for people who trusted their hospitals and surgeons. Each hospital had been warned in some form. Each either admitted him anyway or failed to act quickly enough to prevent the next tragedy. The unraveling of Duntsch's practice was not driven by regulators or administrators so much as by 2 physicians who refused to let the pattern persist. Robert Henderson and Randall Kirby reviewed cases, documented the anatomical deviations, and carried their concerns to the Texas Medical Board and to hospital administrators. They faced institutional resistance, a medical culture that discourages reporting colleagues, slow regulatory processes, and hospitals that allowed more procedures to proceed even after concerns were raised. When administrative paths stalled, they pursued prosecutors, and the case entered the criminal justice system. Legally, the case pushed novel boundaries. Arrested in 2015, Duntsch faced a felony charge, injury to an elderly person, that had not previously been applied to a physician in Texas. Prosecutors needed to prove that his conduct was intentional, knowing, or reckless enough to cause serious bodily harm. They selected Mary Efurd's case as the basis for that charge. Expert testimony focused on discrete anatomical errors that could not be attributed to bad luck or difficult anatomy. The defense emphasized incompetence rather than criminal intent. The jury convicted in February 2017. Duntsch received a life sentence. Institutional reaction followed. Texas enacted the Christopher Duntsch Law in 2017, requiring hospitals to report physician actions resulting in death or serious injury to the Texas Medical Board within 30 days. The case exposed shortcomings in NPDB reporting and in the habit of hospitals to provide neutral references to avoid litigation. It forced a re-examination of credentialing practices, peer review confidentiality, and the opacity of information available to patients selecting surgeons. Duntsch's story also exemplifies a broader, long-standing pattern in healthcare oversight. Research shows a small percentage of physicians generate a disproportionate share of malpractice claims, yet oversight mechanisms, state boards, institutional peer review, national databases are often slow, inconsistent, and shielded by culture and confidentiality. Patients lack public access to comprehensive histories of privilege terminations or repeated adverse events, meaning that the credential on a wall can be misleading. The personal costs to whistleblowers are real. Henderson and Kirby suffered professional and personal repercussions for their advocacy against institutional inertia. The reforms that followed represent meaningful, if belated, improvements, but they arrived only after dozens had been harmed. The gap between initial warnings and decisive systemic action left permanent damage in its wake. Christopher Duntsch is serving life in prison. Mary Efurd can no longer walk. Philip Mayfield lives with paralysis. Families settled civil suits against hospitals that had allowed him to continue. The case reached a broad public through podcast and television coverage because it answers a terrifying question everyone who undergoes surgery asks: is the person holding the instrument safe? In this case, the answer was no. Subscribe to Case Files TV, because the credential on the wall does not tell you everything about who is holding the scalpel.